Hello everyone, my name is Evelina, and today I'll be talking about dust explosions in industrial settings. So I'll be talking about what causes them, how to prevent them, what the danger is, and then give a few examples of when these things occurred. So dust explosions, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. Basically, they're just explosions that are caused by fine particles that have been dispersed in the air. And there are 5 main factors that cause these. There's obviously fuel and oxygen, which create the combustion reaction. There's the ignition source, but there are also 2 other factors, which is dispersion and confinement. Dispersion just means that it needs to be in the atmosphere, so if it's just on the ground and you ignite it, it won't cause that much damage. However, when it ends up in the air, it will cause a large pressure and a large explosion that could cause quite a bit of damage. And for the fuel, it needs to be below 400 microns, and believe it or not, a lot of things are flammable. Basically, that includes foods such as flour, grain, and sugar, but also wood and polymers, and even some metallic dust such as aluminum and iron. The oxygen is generally what is found in the air. However, there are some cases, though they are very small, where the oxidizer is actually in the fuel itself, and you don't really need it to ignite. So, what are the dangers of dust explosions? Well, first of all, they're very dangerous because people actually underestimate how much they can do. A lot of times, while companies know the danger, they will not tell the workers, so they do not have the right training or any idea of how to deal with it. And also, it is easy to create the right conditions. And most of the times, people will just ignore any dust. And lastly, because it creates secondary explosions. Now, secondary explosions are even more deadly because while a spark or just a small fire might be a hindrance, secondary explosions work when the primary explosion will actually disrupt more dust, which will create more fuel in the air, and it can propagate throughout the entire facility or throughout the entire air duct. And secondary explosions generally cause even more damage than the primary explosions. And more often than not, companies do not account for that, or they will simply ignore the danger. So how do you prevent them? Well, first of all, like I said before, you need to know what danger you're in. That means that you need to get a thorough hazard assessment on all the chemicals and all the materials that you're going to be using in a plant, and you need to inform your workers and train them on how to properly handle these materials and how to deal with them, and as well as how to clean. Also, you need inherently safer plant design, which means that in order to prevent secondary explosions that can be caused by buildup of dust on horizontal surfaces, you avoid doing that, and you don't have pipes that cannot be accessed by anything that can be cleaned. You have proper ventilation facilities, and you have dust collectors that are able to handle pressures and potential explosions. And lastly, you need to have proper housekeeping and protocol. By that I mean you need to properly clean up the dust and know when there is danger. So if you see that there's dust on the equipment, you can't use compressed air, but rather a vacuum. And if you find that something is a spark, you have to shut down the plant. And also, with the inherently safer plant design, spread out conveyor belts or spread out parts that can pose a hazard, as well as remove any ignition sources from the dusts. So all these things so far seem like pretty straightforward, pretty easy to comply with, but dust explosions actually killed about 273 people from 1973 to 2003. And in 2003, there was a series of pre-dust explosions that basically made CSB reevaluate how they deal with these problems. So on October 29th, 2003, aluminum dust exploded in Hayes Lemmer's International. They were decorated aluminum parts for wheels, and the explosion originated in the dust collector and spread throughout the entire duct. 2 people were injured and 1 was fatally wounded. And because of how badly they dealt with their dust, there was a secondary explosion that was caused by the disruption of the dust from the primary explosion. So there was a lot of damage, and a lot of it could have been prevented because there was literally dust that was about inch thick, and whenever there was dust on the floor, instead of vacuuming it, they actually just used compressed air, which made it actually rise up and create a bigger hazard. Another company that had the similar problem is CTA Accounting. Their accident originated by a small fire that was in the resin, that was caused by resin dust. And it started off as just in one room, but in the end, because there was just so much resin around and they did not account for it, it actually spread throughout the entire facility, and it killed 7 workers in that accident, most of which have actually not been near the explosion when it happened. And there were several things that were wrong with how they've handled their processes. One of which was that there were several fires that was caused by resin dust. However, instead of thinking about it or trying to account for it, they just put it out with water and moved on. So, and they would not account for any problems because this explosion was actually caused by a small oven fire that was near the conveyor belt. So, and like before, there was resin that was about, I believe, several inches thick on some places that they just didn't really clean up. And this was in 2003, and CSB tried to change their regulations. However, on February 7th, 2008, the Imperial Sugar Refinery explosion occurred. And this was one of the deadliest incidents in modern America, or industrial incidents in modern America. 14 people were killed and 46 were injured. It was caused by buildup of sugar on a conveyor belt that was closed off, but through unknown source, probably by mechanical friction, the dust ignited, and again there was a secondary explosion which caused it to spread throughout the duct and not just go to the conveyor belt, but also go to the holding cell and, I believe, the dust and the sugar refinery. So CSB found many reasons this occurred, including inadequate dust collectors, poor housekeeping, and a lack of training. Workers that were there didn't even know that sugar could pose a threat to their lives. Thing is, they did have proper ventilation in 2007 that prevented dust accumulation in a room, or it made it so that the dust was below a certain concentration so that it wouldn't explode. However, in order to prevent containment, they actually enclosed the conveyor belt where this occurred in a steel cell, which actually helped with dispersion and helped the accumulation of dust. So, in conclusion, dust explosions seem like they should be easier to prevent because there's obvious danger and there are ways you can keep it from happening. However, they still account for a lot of accidents. And we were actually talking about dust explosions in my safety class. And right after we learned the Imperial Sugar Refinery, we asked our professor, well, what changes did they make? Because in the video they said they wanted to change regulations, and he said, not at all. They're still working on it. And this was 9 years ago. So I think that the best thing to do is to know that this can be a hazard. Pretty much most organic materials can ignite, and while vapor such as methanol is a lot harder for, and unlike methanol, which has a very low flammability limit, it does take a bit more heat for most particles to ignite. However, it can even be, however, the ignition source can be static or just friction. So, yep, thank you.